The harbor slept under a blackout, all windows dimmed to keep the war from seeing where to strike. Beyond the breakwater, water shifted in slow breath. A dark skin pulled tight over machinery no one ashore imagined. Two men lay prone inside a steel tube scarcely longer than a truck. Battery heat pressed the air to syrup. Their world was dials, sweat, and the taste of metal. They moved forward by inches, timing propeller pulses with surf so the sentries on the mole would hear only waves. Allied sailors later nicknamed them orcas because they hunted silently in pairs and surfaced only to kill. The Imperial Japanese Navy called them something plainer. Midget submarines, Type A craft led from a mothership. When the crew opened the forward shutters, two torpedoes stared ahead like blunt teeth. The mission was always the same: slip into an enemy anchorage, strike a heavy ship at the moorings, and accept that there would be no round trip. Before Pearl Harbor's dawn, mother submarines cast these little killers off like seeds. Ko-Hayoteki craft crept for the channel, while above them aircraft crossed the horizon. One midget grounded, one broached, and was shelled. Another rode in unobserved until its torpedoes traced white scars and vanished beneath battleships' shadows. Afterward, the wrecks told a simple truth. The pilots rarely returned, but the idea would not sink. The Navy kept experimenting with smaller hulls, longer batteries, new periscopes, and crews willing to trade breath for reach. By 1942 and 1943, harbor watches in Sydney and Diego Suarez learned new shapes of fear. Patrol boats groped with grapnels. Searchlights combed black water and found periscope wakes like scratches. In Madagascar, a midget torpedo tore the British battleship Ramillies and sank a tanker. In Australia, nets and quick eyes saved ships, but not the city's sleep. The boats were cramped, cruel machines. If a battery vented chlorine, the crew coughed green and went blind. If a ballast valve stuck, they sank like a bell and listened to hull plates talk as pressure rose. Then came the weapons that erased even the pretense of return. Human-guided torpedoes called chitin, heaven shakers. They were submarines only by courtesy, a warhead with a man joined to it, his legs near the motor and his eyes behind a tiny periscope. Trainers promised glory and wrote letters to mothers. The boys wrote back about honor and used careful pen strokes to hide the tremor. A chitin pilot entered through a hatch the size of a coffin lid, sealed himself in, and watched his own oxygen as much as his target bearing. Motherships like I-58 carried them to the launch point, then turned away so they would not feel the final impact. Harbors learned to answer. Nets draped entrances. Hydrophones whispered to map rooms. Destroyers idled with engines warm, and crews at tea that grew cold too fast. Even so, a chitin sometimes threaded the guards and ran one bright track into a hull. At Ulithi in November 1944, a single man-steered torpedo found the fleet oiler Mississiniwa and set her afire until flames turned the lagoon into a day. The pilot died nameless in the official record, his body part of the blast he made. In other raids, the chitin broke early, dived crooked, or suffocated their pilots before contact. Accuracy belonged to luck and to batteries that did not fail. Most operations began the same way: a long crawl by a big submarine to within miles of a guarded harbor, a last conference over bearings, then the release. In the tubes, condensation beaded like sweat. Crews shaved down Lucky Charms so they could fit them in pockets already full of tools. A hand crank pump squeaked behind a pilot's right shoulder. The plan called for speed in the final run, a straight line, a last aim. What the plans could not settle was conscience. A few pilots steered wide on purpose and blamed currents. Others said the sea had no place for second thoughts. The Allies dragged channels at dawn. Grapples lifted steel that had never seen sun. Some midget subs came up whole with their crewmen still at stations, hands on wheels, hair floating like dark weeds. In Hawaii, One raised hull showed holes from machine gun fire, so close the paint had burned. In Sydney's harbor, divers found a body with a wedding band filed thin so it would slip off over knuckles swollen by the sea. The band was in his breast pocket, wrapped in oilcloth. Perhaps he had meant to mail it home from Victory. The post never came. Among their own, the men were remembered as swords for the emperor. Among their enemies, they were puzzles, brave, deluded, effective, wasteful. A destroyer sailor saw the wake of a periscope heading for his anchorage and felt only the practical hate of a man about to die. A harbor master added lines to a chart and made the net deeper. A chaplain said a word over men who had chosen not to return and wondered what word could possibly fit. The sea keeps receipts. Off atolls and headlands, wreck hunters find the little boats rolled half into sand, their periscopes folded like insect limbs. Letters in the pressure hulls turned to pulp decades ago. In museums, replicas sit under glass, small enough to shock tourists who imagined submarines as cities. Guides point to the seat and say, "Here is where a pilot knelt, here is the valve, here the aiming scope." Someone always asks, "Did it work?" The guide gives the only honest answer. Sometimes. Sometimes a tanker burned, sometimes the only thing destroyed was the man inside. It is tempting to tidy the story, madness or valor, genius or waste. The record resists. The midget boats at Pearl Harbor failed to change the day, but they haunted the after-action reports. The Chiton helped sink ships and also took pilots into blackness with no witness. Harbor raids forced defenses that cost time and steel and made captains sleep with one eye open. None of that shortened the war. All of it sharpened its teeth. Imagine one last run. A pilot trims his depth by feel because the gauge fogs. He sees the pale stripe of a hull in periscope glass and lines it with the vertical wire. He breathes slow to conserve the bottle and counts the seconds he was taught. He remembers the letter he wrote and the hand that will open it. He advances the motor lever. Somewhere above, a sentry stares into the dark and sees nothing change until the water itself leaps. In the heavy ship's wardroom, the coffee cups jump. Two men look at one another in a brief, clean moment of comprehension. A life is coming at them like a math problem, with only one answer. When the splash settles and the harbor goes back to its ordinary lapping, the stories diverge. Sometimes there is only oil and silence. Sometimes there is fire that makes noon at midnight. Often, there is a searchlight skittering over black water and finding nothing shaped like a man. The pilot's name becomes paperwork. A clerk stamps the file. Far away, a mother is told her son died gloriously, which is a way of saying there is no grave to visit. The little subs are wrecks now, not weapons. Fish swim through the control space. Crabs explore dials. Divers kneel where men once knelt and decide what they think of sacrifice. In the end, the wrecks say what the war always says, that courage and futility can share the same hull, and that a plan that requires a man to die to prove it worked is less a strategy than a confession. On calm days, locals say the lagoon still remembers. A ripple runs against the wind where a patrol once turned, and at night a faint engine note rides the tide. No boat in sight, only a rumor of batteries that will never run dry. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.